Last Sunday morning was Acts 17:14. We were on Paul's second missionary journey there. We were questioning whether or not he practiced deceit in escaping his pursuers by having them think that he went one way when in fact he went another. And one of you asked a question that, and we pretty much ended with the conclusion it appears that he just went by sea. And someone asked the question, looking at the maps in their Bible, well, what about the third missionary journey then? They have it drawn as though Paul went by land there. And I said that would be a very difficult journey. And I'm still looking at my KJV maps, and I assume you were looking at your NIV map, because that does have it, if you'll look in the back of your NIV Bible, the third journey by land. And I just wanted to come back and correct anything that I had said there and be a little more specific on this third journey. And the same is true of the second journey, that I know of nothing at all in the book of Acts or in Paul's epistles that would dictate the way they have drawn this map. Paul's third missionary journey and trip to Rome. You notice the purple line is his third journey. We've got him going from Macedonia down into Achaia and then back up to Macedonia again, all by land. Now, those travels from Macedonia down to, I could even make it more than that. The travels from Ephesus, notice how he starts over there in Ephesus. The travels from Ephesus to Corinth and let's say back up to Macedonia. Those travels are all found within a couple of verses, the first few verses of Acts chapter 20. And we're just simply not told hardly anything there. All we know that he spent time in Macedonia. While he's up there, he's writing the epistle to the Romans, or to Corinthians before he gets there. And then he comes down to Corinth, and he ends up writing Romans. And he spends the winter, which would probably be the 3 months, down in Corinth, and then he goes back up into Macedonia again. Now, your KJV Bible has all of that drawn by water, which I'm sure must have been the case. It just was too difficult of a journey, 250, 300 miles. It would take a month or more to walk that distance. And it just doesn't seem to me like there's any evidence at all. And why they did this, I just don't know. I don't know why they got that journey shown by land. Now, if you go back to where we were last week and you remember the point that I made that Luke in his travel narrative generally, almost always, not always, almost always, generally gives the port of embarkation whenever they're traveling. But that's not necessarily true. If what we have here on the third journey is in fact Paul traveling by sea, then here's another case, the same as chapter 17 of Paul traveling by sea with no port of embarkation given. If that's true, then you don't only have one case in Acts 17, but you have another one in Acts 20, and you may even have more than that. That seems to be Luke's general pattern, but he doesn't always follow that. So I just wanted to clarify that. I like to be as clear and as precise as I can be, because sometimes one little word or one little statement can throw you this way or that. I remember Friday night we were talking about the mystery religions, and I was talking about their initiation rites, and I made a statement along this line that in their initiation rites and their ceremonies, they were somewhat similar to our modern day secret societies and other religious cults. And as soon as I said that, one sister sitting in the back, piped up other. She heard me say that word other. Well, you might just think I just say that not thinking, but I, sit at home specifically planning and choosing which words I want to say, what implication I want to give by that. Now, I don't go by every word that I say. It depends on whether I'm trying to be precise, but most of the time I am. I have some meaning for saying what I'm saying. It's too bad in public speaking, most people, and I include myself, simply cannot be as precise as you can in the written word, because there you can always go back, erase, scratch it out, change it. You can't do that. Once you've spoken it, you've said it. But generally I try to be precise in what I say, and I chose that word specifically, other, because of the connotation it would bring. Instead of saying secret societies and religious cults, that means something different than secret societies and other religious cults. And she noticed it right away. And I sat at home that afternoon specifically wrestling over that word other. Now, am I going to put this word other in or not? Because if I put it in, it means one thing. If I take it out, it means something else. So I was blessed, since I spent about 5 or 10 minutes wrestling over that, and you never would have thought of the word other, that someone noticed it here that I said other. There were some other words that were used that I try to choose my words carefully. So I want to correct that and make sure we all understand that. Your KJV Bible and NIV Bible have a different third journey of Paul, one by sea, one by land. And I think most definitely he took the trip by sea. And why NIV has land, I don't know. Now in 1 Samuel 16, all we really need here in the chapter, the first few verses, of course. Here we've got the case of Samuel. Saul has been rejected in the previous chapter. He's been rejected twice, but the final rejection is in chapter 15 as the king, the first king over Israel. And David is to be anointed and selected in his place. David probably goes through a plurality of anointings, and one of those, anyway, is found here in 1 Samuel chapter 16, although we probably won't get down as far as that. Now, in my paper, we're on the top of page 27, new paragraph. I closed last week with this first sentence, and so I'll open this week with it. In my opinion, there's no more difficult of a passage that relates to this question of truthfulness in all of the Bible than 1 Samuel 16, verses 1 to 5. So as you know, we're going to start our discussion of that this morning, and we may be able to get through. It's difficult in one sense, but it's difficult, maybe an explanation, but there's one sense in which it's rather easy, and that sense is why my next sentence here in the paper is just one word, why. Maybe we'll get into that here. I'm sure that will be brought out as we discuss this. In my opinion, there's no more difficult of a passage that relates to this question of truthfulness in all of the Bible than 1 Samuel 16, verses 1 to 5, period. Why? Question mark. And that kind of really sets the scene for why 1 Samuel 16 is difficult, more difficult than the other passages. It has something unique in it that the others don't necessarily have. Now, one could argue for the fact that Joshua 8 equally, as does 1 Samuel 16, have a certain unique feature in it. Well, it wouldn't be unique because it would be brother to what we have in 1 Samuel 16 that would also make it difficult. But, of course, that's a question of interpretation. And Lord willing, we'll be to Joshua 8 on another day and look at the Battle of Ai with Joshua and the Israelites against the city of Ai. Now, I thought this morning what I should do is probably make you sit on opposite sides of the room. That would be best, but one of these days we're all going to get so bright we're all going to have the right answer. And I thought, well, that won't work because we won't all fit on one side of the room. So let's see how much of an agreement we have this morning. Who's in favor of what takes place here? It's truthful. Nothing wrong has taken place according to Israel, Samuel, God.
All right.
See, my suspicions are being fulfilled. Who thinks we have something wrong taking place here? Well, that's kind of what I assumed this morning. See, I never assumed that earlier, but I assume it this morning because of my question, why? And I don't know if you can answer the question why in so many words. Probably you can't. But those of you that can't, it's somewhere working in your subconscious mind, or you wouldn't be over on that side. You'll see what I mean as we go along. Let's read the passage to begin with then. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me." Well, the Lord says, "Take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled. When they met him, they asked, "Do you come in peace?" They knew what thunder and fire he could bring, like back in chapter 12 of this book. Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Now, There's the crux of the passage and of the problem found in those 5 verses. We don't even need to know the story of what happens. That's really not going to help us determine, because we're told what's going to happen by what's stated here in these first 5 verses. So that's really not going to help us to determine the ethicalness of what we find here in the first 5 verses. Now, if all of you are on the side that everything is okay, that means that we don't have any problem with this second verse. Samuel said, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me." Because God said, "Go anoint a son of Jesse as king." The Lord said, "Well, we'll take care of that. Take a heifer with you and say, 'I've come to sacrifice to the Lord.'" Now, I don't think it's so much of a question of whether or not he came to sacrifice, because we would argue, well, he went on and sacrificed, so he didn't tell any lie there, he came to sacrifice. Well, we know that. That's not so much the problem. We're talking about pretension here. We're still under pretension. It goes back to Elisha's days and strategy being employed. Certainly strategy is being used here, but it's some very interesting strategy. It's almost an afterthought plan to divert the people's understanding and comprehension of the real mission for him coming there. Therefore, to make them think that things are other than they really are. Even if you argue that they go ahead and sacrifice, you're still making them think other than as things really are. Because sacrifice was, according to what we're reading here, sacrifice, that was an afterthought. And if the people say, down in verse 4, "Do you come in peace?" He said, "Yes, in peace." And then probably their question also, "Do you come in peace? Why are you here?" "Yes, I come in peace, and here's why I'm here. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord." Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me. So where do you want to begin this morning? Who's got the first wise insight to 1 Samuel 16, 1-5? You're all on one side. Why? Let's start with that. Why are you on that side?
First of all, God told him to take the heifer and tell him you're going to sacrifice.
God's party to the strategy.
We know he's not going to lie.
Right. That's what makes the passage easy in one sense. I didn't think anyone would say that Samuel is wrong here, because to say that, you're saying God is wrong. Evidently, it was okay in earlier portions of our study and passages of the Scriptures to say that someone, such as Abraham, was wrong, because to say that he was wrong was not necessarily to implicate God as well. But here, to say Samuel is wrong is to say that God is wrong.
I don't know how it is textually, but I guess you could say, for looking at it from the other point of view, that in verse 5, he almost gives the implication that that's the only reason that he comes. I am come to sacrifice.
Yes.
He doesn't leave any loopholes as far as...
Yes.
You know.
That is the implication, but you have to, along with that, wrestle with the earlier study. You don't have to always tell all that you know. But again, a withholding of a part or telling of a part can't deceive the people, and they're certainly deceived here, because they think that's all he's come to do is sacrifice. He doesn't have to tell all. He only tells some, but he withholds part, though.
When he withholds part of it, he withholds something that they will eventually come to know anyway, and it's not necessary for them to know at this time, because David won't be king at this time anyway.
Okay. Other comments? We've come across that comment before. See how important it is to study these things and work step by step. We've come across that comment right there before. We still would like to narrow that down some, though, and go a little further there, which I don't know if we really want to spend the time doing that this morning, but does that mean you can just tell a lie to anyone that you want to, as long as it doesn't bring any harm? Tell any type of lie you want to, as long as you make sure they know the truth by next week or something. See, I think we would all be almost hesitant in going that far with a thing like that you could lie to anyone about anything, as long as it was for a good purpose, almost a situation ethics sin. If it's for a good purpose, and if such knowledge will be made known to them at some subsequent time, as it was here.
I think when the people question Samuel as to why he was there. I think their intent wasn't asking that, because are you here to bring judgment upon us? And since Samuel answered that question with, no, I'm here, I've come in peace, that the question was answered, it was fulfilled. And he didn't necessarily have to say anything more, because he told the people what they wanted to hear, that he was there in peace.
And it would have helped, though, if he would have stopped with yes and peace. But he says yes and peace, and then he goes on to give additional information. I've come to sacrifice. Yeah, that may be the background because of chapters 8 and 12 here in 1 Samuel. They know him to be a mighty prophet of God, and he can make the wind and the storms come just by his prayer to God and the spoken word. And so they're trembling. The elders of the town tremble in Bethlehem. Do you come in peace? And he says yes in peace. That was certainly true. Even if he came to not to sacrifice, in other words, why did he go on and say that? He could have come. That's all they ask is, did you come in peace? So many times what you want, so that you don't have to tell a lie, is you hope that the person will phrase the question in the right way. And these people did. Do you come in peace? He said yes in peace. Even if he didn't have any other plans of sacrifice, they'll never know anything about anointing because they don't ask about that. All he has to say is yes in peace. But he goes on and delves into more information than just yes and peace, and he says, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. They ask a perfect question, and he gave more information than was necessary.
I think the biggest problem is relating back to verse 2, and that he said that with verse 5, that he said he came to sacrifice, is kind of deceiving Saul, because even if Saul wasn't there, he would have found out that Samuel was in Bethlehem, and if he didn't know he had a certain reason to be there, he might come and check it out and might have fulfilled verse 2.
Okay, that's a very good point, because we have to go back to the beginning of the story. Samuel's whole problem is, how can I go? Saul will hear about it. So we're going to do something, even though these people find out about it, it's meant for good for them. Saul also finds out about it, but it's meant for evil for him, though, because he's off the throne and a new king is going to be on the throne. What if Saul finds out about it? All right, I'll tell you what, we'll trick him then. We'll give this certain pretense and this certain report. We'll pretend this, so that in case Saul finds out something about it, he'll think this about it, when really this isn't the case. Yeah, you do have to go back to that second verse. He very definitely is tricking Saul.
Well, why in verse 30 of the previous chapter, Saul wants Samuel to be with him. How come in verse 2 all of a sudden it's almost like there's a problem with Saul finding out about Samuel? And also with the elders of the city, it must be something out of the ordinary taking place.
Okay, well, I'll answer both of those questions and make two comments. And we have to remember Saul's fickle nature. Sometimes David comes in and plays his heart before him and he feels fine. And he loves David. Other times he throws his spear at it. We've got to remember that God has taken away his Holy Spirit and allowed an evil spirit to come to him. So Saul is going back and forth, back and forth. He wants the public prestige in verse 30 of chapter 15 of being seen by all of the people with the Lord's holy prophet. So he said, please just come and at least sacrifice or at least pray to the Lord with me so that we can be seen together. And the people will not think too badly of me. And of course, later he's going to change his mind completely because that's his fickle nature now that this evil spirit has come. And then for your second point, and therefore my second response, something out of the ordinary, Samuel, according to earlier portions of the book of Samuel, had a certain circular yearly route that he traveled on. And Bethlehem was not the important city included in that. So to come to Bethlehem would be something out of the ordinary. And the elders would know something is up here. He's here for good or for evil. That's why they say, why are you here? Do you come in peace? Because they knew that was out of his regular yearly circular route. And so something different is going on. Those of you, all of you, still on the good side, the non-lying side, you don't have any problem with him tricking Saul then? With him planning one thing, or God saying to do one thing, and then he complains about Saul? Well, we'll pretend like we're doing something else and mislead him.
That light of that verse 2, he had faced Saul before in an earlier chapter and said, the Lord has rejected you. And Saul ripped his clothing then. And from that, Samuel knew what Saul would be like if he knew what all was going to take place when it wasn't necessary for him to know it yet.
Mm. Well, the ripping of the clothing, remember, was an accident. That he was just laying hands on him, come back to me, and Saul, as Samuel pulled away from it, actually tore his garment there. And then Samuel turned around with that object lesson that he didn't intend, and then prophesied to him as a result of that. But he certainly knows that Saul is not a stable man, and he's not one to turn your back on. He's a friend at times and a foe at others.
Also with that, I don't have a problem with him fearing for his life, because if you, like in light of with Paul in the New Testament, if you can escape the persecutors, then go for it.
Okay, so she said that we don't have a problem with Samuel being afraid, because we're actually told here that he's afraid. You know, fear can be there are different types of fear. You can just be, cautious, not wanting to die if you don't have to die. And you can be afraid, as Abraham seemed to be afraid, when you lost your faith in God. Whenever Paul or Saul fled down the wall in a basket, I don't think he just lost his faith in God. He just was afraid in the sense that he didn't want to die. And no one just wants to go die if you don't have to, so he made an escape. But Abraham seems to have a different type of fear. That would be a question to get into. What type of fear does Samuel have here? Remember, we put him in the category of the prophets. He just called thunderstorms down here early in the chapter, and it was during the time of the drought. You don't have thunderstorms in Israel then, and that's what convinced all the people. So it seems like he almost could have called down thunderbolts on Saul if he needed to.
That was one of the things I had thought too. I don't think you can read that passage and definitely say that Samuel was fearful. It just makes
Fearful in the sense of Abraham?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think you can either.
Just be a statement of fact that if I go do this, Saul's going to try and kill me.
Yeah.
That's just going to be his nature to do that.
Right. What else?
Well, is it wrong to ask the Lord for further assurance, or to take precautions when the Lord gives you a command to do something? I mean, obviously, he doesn't say, he questions the Lord in a sense, but is that when we haven't determined whether we have, then he's still faithful, he's not being faithless,
But it's a strategy involved, that it seems to be pretense intended specifically to trick Saul, and secondarily to trick the elders of the city. To trick them secondarily, we say, because if he doesn't trick them, they may report to Saul. But his chief concern is not the elders of Bethlehem. They're not going to kill him, but they may report to Saul. So his chief concern is Saul, as he has pointed out in verse 2, or from verse 2. See, that's why I said I wasn't going to divide you this morning. I thought you'd all be on that side, and that's the answer to the question, why, here. In my opinion, this is the most difficult passage. Why? Because God himself is party to the strategy employed by Samuel. So you cannot find fault with Samuel, not with the strategy. You might want with the fear or something, but not with the strategy, because God himself is party to that. Whereas we're not told that God was party to the plan concocted by Abram and Sarai back in Genesis chapters 12 and 20. So you knew the answer to that, whether you could frame it with your mouth or not. You knew, well, God's party to the strategy involved here, so it's okay. So I didn't want to divide you up, because I knew everyone in here would be on that side. But why do we have a problem still? I mean, is that just, all right, God's party to it? Well, if God wants to lie, it's okay if he lies. That's almost what we're ending up with, if we can't give any explanation for why the events as they are told to us here are allowed. The other things, you see, you were struggling with whether it was right or wrong. Here you're pretty much sure that it's okay. But this is going contrary to a lot of things we've looked at and studied and said earlier, though. It looks like something's going wrong here. And if we don't have an explanation for it, then your explanation would be, it's okay, because if God wants to lie, he can lie. If he wants to pretend, he can pretend. He can do anything he wants to do, and it would be right. But he's the God of truth. There's no lying or iniquity with him.
What does he gain by using the strategy over just openly going and doing it? And trusting the Lord that even if Saul sends armies against him, the Lord is going to preserve him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only problem that I face, is that why does he go and say, how can I go?
Mhm.
You know, what elicits a response like that? You know, the Lord commands you to do something.
Mhm.
In other words, probably the purpose for the strategy is not so much Samuel himself, but something out of the ordinary taking place, and then Jesse and his sons coming to be anointed. And with that, Saul being alerted to that possibility and endangering the future king.
Let me read a little bit and see if we can spark any more thoughts here. In this passage we have, number one, concern by Samuel over Saul, and number two, the absence of a spoken lie. Let's deal with number one. Samuel should not be faulted for his concern over Saul, for his concern for Saul had been completely given over to an evil spirit, chapter 16 and verse 14, and was quite dangerous to the point of attempting murder, chapter 18 and verse 11. So I think that one sentence deals with Samuel's fear of Saul. He shouldn't be faulted with that, because he knows what Saul is like. To go around Saul, to be around Saul, is to put your life in his hands. Rather than rebuke Samuel for his fear or allow him to fall into a snare, like Abram earlier, God actually suggests to Samuel a way out. Samuel came not only with the intention of sacrifice, but he literally carried it out. Wherein lies the problem? In this, was not the primary purpose in his coming to Bethlehem to anoint a son of Jesse as king, yet a secondary, afterthought strategy was developed to conceal the mission's goal and to trick the Bethlehemites. Hiding something is allowed. You do not have to tell all you know. But when something is suggested in its place, is not this evasion and pretension a form of deception? The opinions are many and varied. Let me give you a few. Poole, in his commentary, volume 1, page 552, he went under the pretense, there he even uses our word, pretension, that we're studying. He went under the pretense of a sacrifice for fear of Saul. Then my statement about reading the whole passage here in Poole, he faults Samuel for fear. He faults him for fear, but said he did not have to tell all that he knew. Matthew Henry, volume 2, page 365, faults his lack of faith, but says nothing about the problem of duplicity. The Jameson Fawcett Brown commentary, volume 1, page 174, says of verse 2, another instance of infirmity in Samuel. So he faults his fear, but again, has no problem with the strategy. Expositors, volume 2, pages 67 to 68, faults Samuel's fear. All of them are. Then he says it was a concealment of a thing which Samuel was under no obligation to divulge. That's what we're trying to get a handle on. When are you under an obligation to tell, and when are you not? Cook, volume 2, page 315. Secrecy was a necessary part of the transaction, but secrecy and concealment are not the same as duplicity and falsehood. Well, we would grant that. Concealment of a good purpose for a good purpose is clearly justifiable, e.g., for example, in war, in medical treatment, in state policy, situation ethics then, if you take that concealment too far. There is therefore nothing in the least inconsistent with truth in the occurrence here related. So no problem at all. Calvin, as quoted in Kyle, volume 2, page 168, there was no dissimulation or falsehood in this, since God really wished his prophet to find safety under the pretext of the sacrifice. A sacrifice was therefore really offered, and the prophet was protected thereby, so that he was not exposed to any danger until the time of full revelation arrived. Which is what she has said, as long as you find out about it later on, that's okay. But then my question was, well, how often can we use that? Could I tell you, we got to know how far we can take these things, something that's not true, as long as I know I'm going to tell you the truth tomorrow. Pulpit Commentary, Volume 4, page 295. The question has been asked, was there in this any duplicity? In answer, we may ask another question, is it always necessary or even right to tell in all cases the whole truth? They keep going back to that point. Well, you don't have to tell all that you know. We know that. That seems not even to be the issue right here, though. You don't have to tell all that you know. The issue, almost to me anyway, would appear to be the chronological order of the events. Kyle, his own thoughts, Volume 2, pages 167 and 168. There was no untruth in this, for Samuel was really about to conduct a sacrificial festival. It was simply a concealment of the principal object of his mission. Then Murray, in his Principles of Conduct, pages 139 to 141, ends up with 3 points of conclusion. I think I'll give you those here in a moment, and we'll look at that. Well, you see, these men are the same as you. They don't want to fault God. They've got to allow Samuel to be justified and acquitted in what he does here, because they don't want to be found to be fighting against God. So, in one sense, that's why 1 Samuel is so easy. Easier than all the others. You just jump into it. God said do it. He did it. Well, it has to be okay. One sense it's easier, but in another sense, God said to do it, and can God do something like that? Then if God can, why can't we? Now, if it's a moral wrong for us, it's a moral wrong for God.
For the continuation
wrong. If it's a moral wrong for us, it's a moral wrong for God. The opinions are, I'm back to my paper. This was church notes. See, I have to read from both because church notes were incorporated into paper, but not all of them fit. So it would have been just too lengthy. Poole, stating he went under the pretense, Expositor's Bible. I just kind of list. Cook, Pulpit, Kyle seem to not have grasped the depth of the problem. Kyle quotes Calvin as writing, and I read. All right, here we're back to Murray, John Murray. He was a professor down at Westminster Seminary back when they founded it. In his discussion, Murray concludes with 3 points. This is Murray Principles of Conduct, page 140. Number 1, Samuel did only what God told him to do. Well, we would have come up with that point. Number 2, concealment in certain areas is allowed. Well, we would come up with that point. Number 3, by concealing the truth, we may not tell untruth. We would agree with that. And that was the end of his discussion. Well, see, we already know those 3 points there. But that still doesn't tell me how we work these 3 points, or any of these guys, or your point of view, into the passage over here, though. See, in one sense, it appears to be so simple. Well, he doesn't have to tell all that he knows. Well, we already know that. You can conceal. Well, we already know that. But can you dream up this strategy to trick someone to make them think otherwise? Yes. You talk while I think, if I want to say what I was going to say.
Part of this argument, I'm not exactly sure what my thoughts are. I know what I want to say, but we have to assume, or they have to assume that Samuel's going there to anoint the king. Now, if they don't think that to begin with, then you're not deceiving them about something that they don't have any idea of to begin with.
Okay.
So, if they're not already thinking about the king being anointed, then, and he's not telling them anything about that, how can they be misled about something that they don't have any idea?
Well, then why do we even need the strategy? They're not even thinking about it. No problem. Just go and anoint the king and run.
Well, perhaps that's part of Saul's violent nature, that Samuel, that he killed that Amalekite king there, and maybe Saul's upset about something else, or maybe he's not upset about anything. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with Samuel anointing the king at that time. That Saul's not even thinking of that, and that it's just Samuel trying to protect himself for any reason, not necessarily that reason in particular. Saul
already knows he's been rejected as king before that.
True. He already knows that.
So he would come with anything out of the ordinary that Samuel would make.
Right, because Samuel is the only qualified prophet to anoint a king. Saul's pretty much privy to all of that. He has an evil spirit, but he's smart enough to figure these matters out. He knows he's been rejected in chapters 13 and 15. He knows what's going on. God's going to dump him really soon. And isn't he already suspicious of David? Saul has slain his thousands, the women sang, and David his 10,000s. He's already suspicious of this goodly man. Samuel did only what God told him to do. Concealment in certain areas is allowed. By concealing the truth, we may not tell untruth. This all reads fine and well, but basically the writers seem to miss the essence of the issue. It is interesting that Calvin faults Jeremiah for fear, but not Samuel. Evidently because Samuel acted under God's authorization and Jeremiah under the king. So you couldn't fault Samuel because you'd be faulting God. Contrary-wise, we acquitted Jeremiah. But some ask, is there not a dissimilarity between the cases? Let us summarize both of them. Now we're talking about the Jeremiah case where, again, he told certain information and he didn't tell other information. Same thing here with Samuel. He tells certain information, he withholds other information. And some, whenever they look at that, they say, well, now if Calvin condemns Jeremiah, which of course he does, he faults him for his fear and duplicity involved there, and now he is going to acquit Samuel, then there must be some dissimilarity in the cases. And the first thing people would think of, well, the king authorized one and God the other. Well, here is a summary of them. Number one, both tell no untruth at all. They just select part of the truth to tell. Number two, both tell only that part of the truth which is innocuous. That is, they conceal something. And the thing that they conceal is what the other people really would want to know. That's number three. What they conceal is more important to the other parties than what they reveal. That's certainly true. Number four, one is under a king's command and the other under God's. But here is the major difference and the stumbling block if not properly explained. Oh, I better not get into that. That gets into my answer then. See, I only have, 1, 2, 3, 4, I only have a paragraph, a half a page to go, and I come up with an answer. Since so much of this, again, it's always heading back in that area of persecution, or so many times it's heading back in that area. You almost have to put it into maybe a modern context and see how you'd end up there. Yes.
We judge from the Jeremiah situation that the information we had to be assured of this was unnecessary because it was already told or already should have been known what Jeremiah was saying. And I think we can apply that here if you say that they should know, or if they don't, then there's no excuse for them not knowing the fact that Samuel is going to anoint a king at some point, and that to say it is useless. It's not, it's not necessary because they should know that information already.
Okay, you follow what he's saying there, and it's taking you. That's why I took you back to the Jeremiah case to think that one through. We approve of what Jeremiah did. Why in the world is Samuel going to Bethlehem? But, however, you could point that out as similarity between the two cases. But, again, you've got to think of more that's taking place here in this time of what Samuel does, that just because he goes to a city to which he normally does not go does not necessarily mean and would not necessarily imply that everyone should think that he's going to anoint a new king. The people aren't necessarily privy to as much information as is King Saul. But what they would know that he would be doing would be coming there for some type of festal ceremony, a sacrifice, because he did seem to, the prophets in this period did seem to do things like that. So they could just assume he's coming here to sacrifice. They're a little afraid, so they ask him. And then he tells them, your fears are unfounded. I'm coming here to do, as you might suspect, I'm coming here to sacrifice. And yet that's really not what he's coming there to do.
But didn't he anoint David at that sacrifice? Was
Yes,
the
he
people
did.
even present? So he in essence did tell them, but it was like, this is how I've been trying to think it out in my mind, and Samuel comes and tells them, I've come to sacrifice, prepare yourselves for the sacrifice, and in his mind, he's thinking, I'll let them, it's just like, I can't tell you all now, but when you come to the sacrifice, the rest of it will all be told to you then, and my true purpose will be revealed.
Okay, let's jump down and read some more then. Verse 6, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, and he goes through all the sons. They're still the youngest. Jesse answered, he's tending the sheep. Send for him before we will not sit down until he arrives. Verse 12, so he sent and had him brought in. Lord said, arise and anoint him. Saul took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. And Samuel then went to Ramah, which was one of his regular cities. So, in front of whom was he anointed? Was it really all the people and the elders? It's the elders that he's concerned about. They're the official leaders. Or is it just his brothers? Appears to be a private ceremony there.
I think that what Brother Ed was saying about, that being common knowledge would make our case look worse, because then everybody would assume that he's going to anoint a king. So that's what Saul would think right away. So that's why that would make Samuel have more reason to have some kind of scheme to say, hey, I'm not going to anoint a king, I'm going to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
It was a diversion, but it was also played off of their own misconception about things.
Mm-hmm.
Because why should they be trembling or saying, are you coming in peace? They know that Samuel is going to do whatever loaded words I'm going to sacrifice. They should know that they're loaded words.
Why should they know that? In other words, they would think that there's more behind the scenes besides just sacrificing?
Well, think what they want. They shouldn't oppose Samuel in any way. They're not going to be hurt by anything Samuel says. So they can be left in that. I'm saying there's no harm done in leaving them in what may be confusion or deception or diversion.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point.
But what I'm pointing out is that that's not the main point. The main point is he does that to deceive Saul, not the people. In other words, Saul is his main concern. And if the people thought he was coming to anoint the king, they'd run and tell Saul right away, and he'd come and try to kill him. And that's the whole reason for pretending he's coming to sacrifice.
He had already told Saul that the king was given to a neighbor. It says King James, but so Saul already knew that. And when Samuel went into the city, he didn't know who he was going to anoint to be king. The only thing he knew was one of the sons of Jesse. So actually, to get into it with anybody would have been just something that he would probably assume, being the major prophet at the time, that he was going to be anointed the next king. That was almost common knowledge between him and Saul.
Mm-hmm.
And for him not to come, he would have had to almost specify who's this king going to be, and he didn't know himself.
Mm-hmm.
Saul knows that Samuel's going to anoint a king, and therefore if he kills him, he won't be able to anoint another king, instead king. And Samuel knows that Saul has an evil spirit, which with that evil spirit will urge him to kill him, so he won't anoint another king. So Samuel goes to the Lord and asks, well, how do I get around this? Go down and anoint this king. And the Lord tells him to go and sacrifice to me, and then in that sacrifice, after the sacrifice, then I'll tell you which one, or where to go after that. to anoint a king. So during the sacrifice, or on his way down there, the people are afraid because they know through the prior occurrences that he's going to anoint a king sooner or later. And they ask him, "Are you, what are you here for?" And his real reason is that he's there to anoint a king at that time. I mean, to sacrifice. At that very time moment, he's going there to sacrifice. And he doesn't tell him later on that he's going to anoint a king, or the Lord's going to tell him during the sacrifice that he's going to anoint a king. So, that's more or less the fact that he's there at that time and moment to anoint a king. And the fear that they talk about is, if he anoints a king, there's going to be an outbreak and a war or some type of disturbance. And that's what they're talking about. And with him going down there, he's not going down there with the fact of war on his mind, to start a battle. He's going down there in peace and to do what the Lord wants him to do. To sacrifice, and then he's going to, do what his job is to anoint a king.
Well, let's put it into contemporary context. And do you feel that? That's why I said a moment ago. We're so far removed. You need to go somewhere, and you're going somewhere for one specific major purpose, and then someone asks you why you're going, and you think, well, I'm going to the store to pick up this, but I'll pick up some notebook paper while I'm there because I don't want them to know the other thing. And you don't really need the notebook paper. They didn't have to have a sacrifice here, but I'll just throw in, and I'll have to buy it. Now, if I tell them I'm going to go get notebook paper, I know I have to buy that. So once you get there, you go pick up notebook paper and waste $1 or $2 on that. Then you get what you really wanted. Now, would that be allowed? Isn't that similar to what we have here? Or before you answer that, he's going there, it seems like, for two purposes. Which is the primary purpose that he's going? To anoint a king. That's the primary purpose. Wherein lies the problem in this? Was not the primary purpose in his coming to Bethlehem to anoint a son of Jesse as king? He finds out who Jesse and everything is. Yet a secondary afterthought strategy was developed to conceal the mission's goal. The goal was to anoint the king and to trick the Bethlehemites. Now, don't bind me too much with that story example I just gave you, because it's not exactly the same as this, in the sense that this deals with life and death matters and fear and anointing of a king and all of this, where that may fit somewhere else that we can use that example later. But I can't think of a good one right now, but you could dream up one with your persecutors after you. And you make sure that they hear you're going somewhere. And, okay, so your lines are bugged. Your persecutors are after you. Government surveillance. And you're going to flee to Maine. Is where you're going to flee. And your friends all know this, and you're talking to one of your friends, another brother or sister here in the body, on the phone, and you know your lines are bugged. And so you say, yes, I realize they're after me. It's real clandestine and top secret, and I'm going to Buffalo to flee from them. And so what you do is you make a quick hop over to Buffalo. Maybe it's Buffalo, Vermont. You found a little small town called Buffalo, Vermont. And so you go to Buffalo there, or you could go to Buffalo, New York, and then you head to Maine real quickly. Now, there's a case that's fairly similar to what we have here. A little bit better than the notebook paper example, although it's certainly not perfect itself. What about those examples? Because, again, you told the truth, and you perform the truth. You conceal something. You don't have to tell all that you know. But again, all that seems to be superfluous to me. The heart of the matter is you wanted to deceive someone. That's what we're talking about with the anatomy of a lie. Go back to our definition of a lie. We're back to the definition. It's things done with the intent of deceit. Things evilly done with the intent of deceit. And you're obviously intending to plainly deceive someone there.
But it seems to me what Bobby's getting at is he's switching it around chronologically. He's saying that first he went to sacrifice, and then second he went to, then he found out who he's going to anoint king. But the problem we're having is that first he was gonna anoint the king, and then he decided that, well, we'll go have a sacrifice, and then anoint the king.
Okay, everyone hold that statement that he's talking about there. Let's backtrack. We're getting very close. This is the word I'm looking for, chronology. We're getting very close to these two brothers now. We're getting close to an answer with what they're talking about. I don't know if this is what you mean, but that's the way your brother interprets you. So we'll let him be right and you be right too. Now we're getting somewhere. Chronology. Okay, let me see if I can read something here and it won't give it away. Here's a major difference in the stumbling block if not properly explained. Number one, in Jeremiah, the conversation which he had with the king was past tense. It was over with when the king looked back and simply selected what part out of it he wanted the princes to know. But number two, with Samuel, all is in the future, and on the surface the scheming seems so deceptive. In other words, with Jeremiah, it's past tense. A lot has been said, and you go pick which portions you want someone else to know. It's not like you have planned to lay this trap and trick someone or deceive someone. It's all past tense. You just go and you have the right to select what you want to tell them from a lengthy conversation that you had. Whereas with Samuel, it seems to be all planned and schemed for the future. This is the way we're going to lay this trap and trick all of these people involved. The plan to anoint comes first, then the fear in Samuel of what might happen, and finally the strategy of sacrifice. So you've got 3 steps there according to 1 Samuel 16, 3 steps. The plan to anoint comes first, then the fear in Samuel of what might happen, and finally the strategy of sacrifice. Is there any way that we could be right in changing the order of these 3 steps? Let me read the next sentence then. I'm almost to the bottom of the paragraph. Oh, you want to go? No more clues on the game show here.
I think if you switch verse 2 and verse 3 around, it would essentially say the same thing, but it would say it without any problem. I'm not saying you can just switch them around, but if the Lord, he says he's rejected the king in verse 1, he says, he said in verse 1, he says, take your oil and go to Bethlehem and anoint a king. Well, I guess you can't switch your own. Okay, I guess that doesn't.
See, I'm not faulting any of all the other comments that you've made about maybe this fits in here, and maybe they don't have to know, maybe they already know. You know, there's a lot of underworkings of things that we've discussed earlier that certainly fit here. But it's still back to the step strategy that's employed here that we don't find anywhere else in the other examples that we've talked about. In my opinion, the true final answer may only be seen with regard to the deep divine counsel. Remember, God is party to the strategy involved here. We need to look into his mind, as it were, and not what Samuel is doing. He's simply following orders. And the orders can't be wrong. He's simply following orders. Only in its revelation to Samuel, and thus to us, does the plan appear deceptive. In God's counsel, however, the twofold plan is concurrent. To Samuel it is revealed, go anoint a son of Jesse as king, and alleviate suspicion by holding a feast. But for the Holy One of Israel, who cannot lie, 1 Samuel 15:29, just the preceding chapter says he's the Holy One of Israel who cannot lie, it definitely exists more as, go sacrifice in Bethlehem, and while you're there, anoint a king. See, we're reading it from the point of view in which Samuel is made privy to that knowledge. But we're not concerned about Samuel or anything else. We're only concerned about God, because he is the author of all of this. Jeremiah, Abram, we don't have God in the picture like we do here. God's plan is, and when I say it's concurrent, God, this gets way off into theology. Things are concurrent with God. He knows the end from the beginning, but there's also logical progression in God's thought. There has to be, or he'd be a static God. There's logical progression in his thought. It's just a mystery that we can't explain, that he knows everything now. It's all concurrent, but yet there is a logical progression to the way that he thinks. So, first of all, his desire for Samuel is to go and hold a feast, go and hold a sacrifice. Oh, and while you're there, you see, God already knows about Samuel being afraid and all of it. He knows of that in advance. Oh, and while you're there, anoint a king. Now, if we reverse the order of it chronologically, then we don't have a problem. You would have to deal with the fact that other people did get deceived in all this, and there is where we would need all of your other points that you've said this morning. Maybe the people already know it. Maybe they find out later in the chapter, or the next year, or the next month, so you're not really withholding anything from them. What we've got to deal with is the strategy and the chronological order of the strategy, step, 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 step. Here, something is reversed. In other words, there's hardly a way that we could do this, because our minds don't think concurrently. We think of a plan to deceive someone, and God has no plan to deceive anyone. God's plan is, his basic, first, general intention and impression is, I'm going to have Samuel go and hold a feast in Bethlehem. And then second to that, and while there, anoint a new king. We're not given that here. We're given just the reverse of that, because it came as its revelation, in its form of revelation to Samuel, and not as the way that God was thinking of it in his own mind. In other words, there's no way we could think, I think I'll just go visit Buffalo, and then after that I'll go flee to Maine. No, the very reason we thought of Buffalo is to trick someone, because that's the way our thoughts would have to develop, where God and his thinking would be entirely different. Now, do you understand that, or do you understand a little bit of that? That's pretty deep to go here. But that's probably what you're going to have to say to come up with an explanation of why and how God did this and how he's justified in what he did. That we've got to reverse the train of thought here. Going and sacrificing was the primary thing God wanted. Doesn't look like it here, but that's the primary thing he wanted. Oh, and while you're there, anoint a king.
In other words, that can't pertain to us at all. We can't do that because we're not like God.
Right.
It only pertains to God and the truthfulness of the Bible.
Right.
As looking at it.
So we can say that intent to deceive is wrong then?
Yes, intent to deceive is wrong. So the scenario I gave you about going to Buffalo, I think, would be wrong. If you know your persecutors are listening over the phone, you can't say, I'm going to go hide in Buffalo and escape my enemies, and where you're really planning to go to Maine. And you go fulfill that so that you don't tell a spoken lie, and then you go there. I don't think that would be allowed. Now, the thing about the paper when you go to the store, that's in a different area, I think. So let's deal with that later on. They may seem the same to you, but I think that fits under a different category. We'll deal with that later on. Well, is that all we need? That's all I have, if you understand that. And see, all these commentators are just blah, blah, on, and they're right. But they're missing the point, though, that still we got to come to some agreement about this strategy employed here. Murray ends with these three little neat points. Well, they're great points, but it still doesn't answer the order of the strategy involved. It still seems to be deception involved here. But not if God's mind was not even thinking as the way that it's revealed to us right here.